So, hi everyone. Um, I'm Jeremy Ace now. You probably still know me. Kakagraduate ko lang 2 months ago. And here I am. It's actually fascinating because I've also handled LTW as a project for 3 years. And now I'm here, but not as an organizer, but now as a speaker. And I'm really grateful for this opportunity to see everyone again, to see LTW. Always a good time. Right? So again, hi everyone, good morning. Hope you're all enjoying. Unfortunately, I might not be able to attend to the questions as much in the chat until after the talk since I'm on full screen. But yeah, before we start, whatever I'll be discussing today, try to take it with a grain of salt. It's little. Because I like to believe that there are really no absolutes when it comes to communication. There's no one rule that holds true for all types of situations. And also before I begin, I'm no communication expert. I didn't earn any degree related to communication, which is why this is a practical guide to effective communication. I'm speaking mostly from experience, science, and a lot of my shower thoughts did. I love biology and I have a pretty solid foundation on biology, which is why I integrated a bit of human science into my leadership experiences. And I hope to be able to share that with you today. And like you, I've sat through so many LTW talks. I've heard about the characteristics of effective communication, the different styles of communication. And today I'd like to take a different approach. What I can offer is to speak and to share from a high school Judenite's vantage point. Today, I'd like to walk you through concepts that are more application-centric, as well as a bunch of things I learned along the way, things I wish I could have known earlier, certain concepts that change the way I view communication, the way I communicate, and concepts that help me a lot as a leader. So, all right, let's begin. So before anything, I'd like to start with a central and recurring concept for the next hour, pretty much hour. So communication is a mind game, or at least I like to think of it that way. And the only way to win this game is for everyone to win. Because to ensure effective communication, a lot of mind reading comes into play. Are they invested in this? Are they really invested in what I'm selling? Or are they just in this position because they need to be? How do you say the right words so they hear what they need to hear, but at the same time, they hear what they want to hear? So it's always conflicting decision, which is why, needless to say, communicating effectively is a complex task. In general, when things get very overwhelming, things become complex, overwhelming when a lot of factors, a lot of people, a lot of variables are being considered. The more complex a task is, the more elements there are to consider, the more decisions there are to make, the harder it is to execute. But what I found fascinating in my process of exploring and experimenting between words is that if you break down these complexities into really small pieces, or the nuances of communication, playing around with just a few simple, minuscule, but key variables can make the most significant differences in communication. What's important is to play around with the right variables for you to make the right and responsible decisions by choosing the option most aligned with your objective and purpose inside. Because ultimately, effective communication is just about consistently making good decisions. We make decisions about word choice, word order, tone, body language. And as I've said, effective communication is just making good decisions about all of these decisions. And as I've mentioned, communication is a mind game. So before you get in the game, it's important to know who you're playing with. It's a game, so you have to know both who you are, who your audience is. So first, let's talk about the self, who you are. For example, me, I'm a bad liar. You can easily tell when I'm lying. Fortunately, I'm a good teller of the truth. So I can't in good conscience tell a lie, especially a big one. Hindi ko kaya yun. Alam ko nakahalata ako. So I don't. Instead, I tell the truth the best way I can. So I think this is one way to apply this "who are you playing with" concept. On the other hand, considering you, my audience, I know for a fact that I'm talking to high school juveniles, and I know for a fact that you are currently in your 3rd week of classes, if I'm not mistaken. So you have to be as engaging as possible, and delivering a lecture type of talk might not be the best option because you've probably had enough of that already. Now, let's proceed. I'd like to introduce you to a simple concept, super simple. So according to Gary Klein, in order to improve our communication, it's not enough that we just increase or improve our skills, increase our insights. Equally as important is to reduce our errors. So with that, let reducing errors be our starting point. So I'd like to start with my first point, breaking barriers. So before anything else, the number one barrier, not really a barrier, but it's something really basic, but I don't want to waste your time, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. I didn't mention this at all. So the number one non-negotiable is grammar. Lagi kong sinasabi sa SC natin na before we put anything out there, before we post anything, before we send anything to anyone, to double check, to triple check even. Because even as little as one mistake, one typographical error, it only shows how 14 people or more failed and didn't care enough to read and recheck. It's definitely a big blow to your credibility. So number one non-negotiable is grammar. And even well-established orgs, or even I myself, at times fall prey to these errors, especially for the tricky ones like hyphenation, apostrophe plurals, comma, semicolons. These the punctuations that we don't normally use. It's easy to mess these up. And what's important is to have someone look at them with fresh eyes, not just you. Kasi maaaring may nakaligtaan ka. So it's nice to have someone else on your team. And that's usually what we have. We work in teams. And the next thing I'd like to discuss, especially for the perfectionists out there, I think a lot might be able to do. So I'd like to introduce you to the 666 rule. So the 666 rule was developed by Mr. Patrick Barry from the University of Michigan. So ano ba itong 666 rule? This is an effective framework that I found, I discovered, and it's blown my mind, honestly. So ano ba tong 666 rule? The first 6 asks, what stands out in 6 seconds? So say, for example, you're writing your resume, or you have a short essay, and you want to ask your friend or maybe a teacher or someone else to read it for you. So an important question to ask is, number one, what stands out in 6 seconds? Is it that you are neat? Is it that you are creative? What is it that stands out in 6 seconds? Now, if your intention matches the answer of the person you asked, say for example, both of you said that the first thing that stands out is your creativity, for example, then congratulations, successfully achieved your goal for the first 6. Now, the second question to ask is, what stands out in 60 seconds? So this is a longer time frame. It can be your attention to detail, your organization. So what are the 3 to 5 things that stand out in 60 seconds? And again, if the answer of the person you're asking matches your intended answer, then congratulations, you've achieved your goal. And the last 6 asks, could a typo be found in 6 hours? So I think for a lot of us, when is enough? When is good enough? When do we stop searching for errors? When is it ever perfect? But I think a good rule would be, if you can't find a typo in 6 hours, you're probably good to go. So why don't we apply the 666 rule? So, well, we don't have 6 hours now, but maybe you can scale it down a little. So I actually talked to the organizers. I've talked to the LDW team. So let's try to have a quick game. Application lang. The group of the first person to find the typo in my PowerPoint will be rewarded. All right. We don't have 6 hours. Let's get it down to probably, we have remaining 49 minutes. So it's the 6, 60, 49. All right. So the group of the first person to identify the typo in my PowerPoint will be rewarded. Yung organizers natin bahala sa pointing system. So yeah. All right. If you found the typographical error, you can just unmute or maybe chat or inform the organizers. Yeah. So moving on. Let's talk about the barriers. Let's talk about the problems that you most probably encounter often. So I think we've all heard of akala ko for 1,000 times. Akala ko is a big problem for several reasons, but mainly because akala ko assumes na ang daming problema dahil sa akala ko. Akala ko okay na, akala ko maayos na, akala ko siya gagawa nito. So the akala ko problem is really an illusion. It's a false sense of security. It's a false sense of assuming that things are all right, that things are clear when in fact they're not. And I think George Shaw put it best when he said, the biggest single problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. I think it's really profound. Oftentimes, may sabihin tayo, we instruct someone or we receive an instruction and we think that it's clear. I've done my part. I've said my words. All that's left is for the other person to do what they're asked. But then again, there's that illusion that communication has taken place, that full communication has taken place from the instruction to the response. When in fact, for the other person, it might be fill in the blanks. And a good way to go around this is to really be clear about what you're saying, to be very specific, and to make sure that you get feedback, that you follow up, that everyone stays on the same page in order to avoid the akala ko problem. So if you're trying to explain something and in the process you find yourself saying akala ko or parang or I think or I thought, maybe try to double check and clarify because assuming can be very dangerous. So next, here are some of the communication barriers. There are quite a lot. Let's start with selective perception. We probably won't go in the very in-depth about each, except for the last two, which I highlighted. But I'll be introducing you to these communication barriers. So number one is selective perception. So over time, we find ourselves, again, assuming. So assumption is really, really a bad habit, I guess, in a way. But selective perception refers to filtering what we see and what we hear to suit our needs. So essentially, it's eliminating the things that we don't think we need and just choosing to retain what we want to retain. So this is really important actually, because every day we receive so many stimuli, we receive so many new information, and sometimes it's necessary to select which ones we need. But sometimes selecting the ones we need leaves out the important parts. So this is one barrier. Number two, info overload. Probably heard of this. You probably not strangers to info overload. But essentially, it's when processing information demands a time frame that exceeds the individual's ability to perform the calculations in your head. So mas maraming pumapasok than you can probably process and take in. And it's important to pace the material, to say things in a more systematic manner, and of course to get feedback every time. Clear ba? Can everyone follow? So these are ways to go around info overload. The third one is emotional disconnects. So an effective communication requires that a sender and a receiver are both open, speaking and listening to each other. So it's important that both parties are emotionally open. So, for example, a receiver who is emotionally sad or upset may tend to zone out or ignore or distort what the sender is saying. On the other hand, a sender who is emotionally upset may not be able to express his or her feelings as well as he or she would probably do if she weren't upset. And the fourth one, lack of context. So maybe you've told a joke before, but it fell flat. Di bumenta yung joke mo. Maybe your joke was funny naman, but your audience just didn't have enough context. Your audience didn't have enough familiarity or knowledge about the joke. So in short, di nila gets. So I think that's an easy way of putting lack of context, the importance of lack of context. And the fifth one would be differences in understanding. So we all come from different backgrounds, different ages, different genders, different culture, nationality, and there can be differences in the way we interpret words, differences in the way we give meaning to the words, and especially in jargon, this can be a problem because we use jargon all the time, but especially for people who might not be part of the organization for quite some time, jargon can mean a different thing to them. Now, the last two, I'd like to particularly give focus to filtering and poor listening. So filtering is essentially the distortion or the withholding of information to manage a person's reactions. So for example, you scored poorly on a test. For example, may dalawang quiz papers binigay. Or wala na palang quiz paper ngayon kasi online. So sa LMS na tayo. For example, 2 grades came out, isa 100, isa 75. So an example of filtering would be to just report the 100 to your parents and to filter out the 75 in your communication process. So this filtering is a problem for many reasons. Filtering prevents members of a team or an organization from getting a complete grasp, a complete picture of the situation. And oftentimes, when a person does not have the whole picture, the whole idea of what's happening, that's when problems can occur. And that's also the source of miscommunication. So when it comes to filtering, here's a great quote by Ken Thoreau. The greatest compliment that was ever paid to me was when one asked me what I thought and attended to my answer. So it's important that what we're trying to communicate and what we're getting out of the communication, we pay complete attention to the meaning, to the words, and in between and beyond the lines. And here I have a few criteria for the next for poor listening, combating poor listening, which is a communication barrier, would be through active listening. And here I have a few criteria, a few rules or guidelines that can help you listen actively. So when you listen actively, you give full attention to what other people are saying. You take time to understand the points being made and not just hearing, not just taking in sounds and interpreting them as sounds, but actually giving meaning to what has been said. So it will be important to listen for message content, to listen for feelings, to respond to feelings, to note the cues, verbal and non-verbal, and lastly, to paraphrase and restate. So I think for many juveniles, the last point might not be as familiar as the first 4 points. Active listening, paraphrase and restate. So this is something I found to be really important and effective in my leadership. So when someone says something, it's important to show the speaker that that you're listening. You can say yes, or you can say that's interesting. Or you can respond with, yes, I agree. Or you can respond through nonverbal cues. You can nod your head, or you can ask questions. That's also another way to signal that you're paying attention. And by paraphrasing and restating, again, we avoid the problem of assuming, because that way, both the information becomes clear for both you and the speaker. So alam mo na, ay, ito pala yun. And alam din ng speaker na, oh, okay, ito rin yung sinasabi niya. So, for example, at the end of a meeting, you can say, great, I'll see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. So basically, that reassures you and the speaker that, okay, it's understood that we're both going to meet tomorrow at 4 p.m. Paraphrase and restate. Or mirroring would also be a good way. For example, your friend tells you about a problem, and then you essentially say the same thing back to your friend. So, so ganito pala. So this happened. Paano na? Ganon. So, it's just a reassurance and a form of clarification that benefits both you and the receiver, both the sender and the receiver, by ensuring that there's a clear path of communication and everyone is on the same page. So I think an interesting example of this is in Starbucks. So Alan Gulick, Starbucks Corporation spokesperson, said that if every Starbucks employee misheard one $10 order each day, their errors and accumulation would cost the company billions annually. So what they did was to teach their employees to listen. So what Starbucks did was they created a code that helps employees to take down orders, to hear the size, flavor, the use of milk more efficiently. And the most important thing is, upon receiving the order, the person making the drink echoes the order out loud. So after niya makuha yung order, gagawa na siyang drink, the person making the drink echoes the order out loud. So that way, there's a checking mechanism that, okay, I got the right order. This is what I heard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Essentially, that's how it works. Now, the next part would be improving purposive communication. So before we talked about reducing errors. Now we're on the improvement side. But before that, I'd like to establish this concept that was made particularly apparent when I left St. Jude. So what's interesting is, and what's something that I think we all take for granted, is the fact that we have a captive audience in school. Because fortunately for us, in school in St. Jude, our teachers are forced to patiently read through all of our works and to listen through all of our presentations. So the teachers have to sit through all of the things that we're talking about. But in the real world setting, unfortunately, this isn't really the case. Because when you put something out there, when you present something, when you talk to someone, as I am right now, no one is obliged to pay 100% attention to what you're saying or what you're writing. For all I know, you could be eating, could be taking a shower, doing homework. And that's just how it is in the real world. You don't always have a captive audience. And here's another quote that perfectly summarizes the importance of communication, the right communication in the real world setting. People pay attention if it's valuable to them. A piece of writing is important not because it is new and original. It is because it has value to some readers. Each word, every word you say, every phrase, every word you write, it's a stimulus to another person. And instantly, the person asks, is this valuable to me? Do I benefit from it? Do I like what I'm hearing? Can I learn from what I'm hearing? Hindi natin siya iniisip, but that's essentially what happens in our brain. And if our brain says no to these things, then you zone out or you scroll through your social media accounts. That's just how it is. And it's for the same reason that chismis is so popular. Because chismis has so much value, and chismis gives a person a sense of power because information is power. But of course, it's not a good practice, no. But what's interesting is just because people value valuable information, this doesn't mean to say that all that you're saying has to be very valuable and substantial for a person to actually listen to you. Rather, the challenge is to make your audience think that what you're saying or what you're writing is important and valuable to them, to you, or to the organization. And this, I think, is the core idea of effective communication as a mind game. Now, this is a very macro thought. Let's go a little bit more micro. So here are some of the purposes of communication. We have small talk at the lower level, then we go up, feelings and emotions, information, and lastly, persuasion. So when it comes to small talk and the feelings and emotion stage, these are the things that are more important. So building rapport. I think there was a question raised in the forums. How do you talk to strangers? How do you strike a conversation? So I think it's important to know a little bit of everything. Know a bit about religion, sports, business, stocks, trading, research, politics. Knowing a little about everything helps you to be more open-minded and to have a starting point in the conversation. So even if it's not a topic you're very enthusiastic or well-versed in, as long as you know a little bit about that topic, it's probably good enough as a head start. So a little background knowledge should propel you far enough for you to be able to steer the conversation to a topic you know more about or to a topic you both mutually enjoy. And another interesting thing, this is something I've learned over the years, is that the secret to building instant rapport is to tell the other person a secret. So telling someone a secret, pero syempre secret mo, hindi secret ng iba. Secret mo. So it's to telling someone a secret creates a binding contract, an invisible contract. So, because it just shows that you value the trust of the other person. You trust the person enough to tell them this, and in return, they trust you enough um, that you are now bound by this invisible agreement, and you know how you now have a duty um, not to tell anyone about this secret. So it's just fascinating how it's interesting. It's interesting. Next one will be empathy. So nevertheless, it's important to be empathic, to be kind to the other person, because we never know what the other person is going through. We're all fighting silent battles, so it's important that we be kind to one another. And lastly, reciprocity. So I think the most trivial example would be, I mean, when you chat with someone and the person responds to you in haha all caps, na maraming ha 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 ha, ha all caps. No, I don't. I think most of the time you'd probably respond with ha 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 ha, ha all caps din. So it's just reciprocating what you're receiving, and it's essentially reciprocating, giving back the same level of energy, the same level of enthusiasm, and it's also nice because that same concept can be applied in the professional setting. So if you're speaking to another person in a professional tone, then it's important to preserve the tone as well. And one more thing when it comes to presenting information is that humans actually listen much faster than they speak. So this may be something that you think is good. Oh, bilis. Okay, humans listen much faster than they speak. But actually, this can be a problem for several reasons. Because what this means essentially is that the audience has more than enough time to hear, and as a result, their minds may wander elsewhere. So, which is why it's important that when you're giving information, it's simple, it's vivid, it's direct. You make the other person feel smart. You can add a little suspense if you're telling a story, and you can also add emotions in order to make it more striking, to make it more appealing. And here is a basic guideline, essentially, for when to use written communication and when to use verbal communication. I find this particularly helpful now that we're in the online setting, because so when do you use written communication? When do you write emails? When do you just call the other person? So I think a good rule of thumb is that when you're conveying facts, and when it's important that it's permanent, it's on record, and when time isn't really an important factor, you have time to wait for a response, then chances are written communication would be the better option. And when you're conveying feelings, emotion, and there is a sense of urgency, you need a response, you need a feedback right away as soon as possible, then verbal communication would be your better option. When it comes to persuasion, this is something that's probably the most important thing in establishing the importance of describing things. Because if you think about it, people don't really choose between things. People only choose between descriptions of things. Especially, for example, when you're shopping online, you don't really choose between things. You're choosing between which description is better. And it blows my mind that, oh nga, all our decisions are just based on how they're described to us, um, our worldviews, how we view them. People don't choose between things; they choose between descriptions of things. And an important part of persuasion is giving them benefits, telling them why, essentially, why they need to do this certain thing, why it's important that 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 they do it, that they listen, that they're convinced by what you're saying. And an important thing to consider is framing, because as I've said, people choose between the descriptions of things. Therefore, the words you choose can change the decisions people can make. Here are a few examples. So for example, when you say survival rate is 90% versus mortality rate is 10%. So it means the same thing, but people are more appreciative of the first one. Survival rate is 90% because no one wants to hear about mortality. The same way 75% lean is more preferred than 25% fat. And the last one here, A versus D. So I'd like to conduct a quick poll, quick check. So a while ago, I said the first, when instructing you about the 666 rule game that we have. So I said the first person to find the typo in the PPT. Now, so could you imagine how it will be different if I said the first person to find a typo in the PPT? Kasi by saying the typo, it's essentially assuring the audience that there is a typo. The typo, yung typo. But when if I say the first person to find a typo, then there could be a good chance that there's no typo at all. And I just want you guys to look at the PowerPoint. So that's the importance of framing. And here are some of the communication freezers. Essentially, here are some of the lines that you might want to avoid in communicating. Telling the other person what to do, you must, you cannot. Threatening, making suggestions, you should, it's your responsibility to. Blaming other people or attempting to educate the other person. Let me give you the facts. Experience tells us that ganito, ganyan. Judging the other person or giving insincere praise. I know you can do better than this. Psychoanalyzing the other person or making light of the problem by kidding. Think about the positive side. You think you've got problems. Ako nga, ganito. These things are communication freezers. So these are the lines that you probably want to avoid in communicating with other people. And at this point, I'd like to talk less and let the real life applications and examples speak for themselves. I'll be providing substantial examples from University of Michigan's writing and editing course. And it's the part that I personally find the most fascinating. But before that, allow me to introduce you to the sandwich method. So what is the sandwich method? So as president, as former student council president, criticism, giving negative criticism, rather constructive rather, is a challenge, I think, for everyone. And a good way to put criticism to give criticism is the sandwich method. So what the sandwich method tells us essentially is like a sandwich. First, you put the positive comments, and then in between, you insert your criticism, and then in the end, you end with an appreciation or a praise. So essentially, it's bad, good, bad sandwich. So the bad is sandwiched between the two goods. But I like to advise you to proceed with caution. You wouldn't want to overuse the sandwich method because it weakens the criticism, and if you overuse it, people might think that you're insincere with your praise and that you're just putting the praise there just because you want to sandwich the bad stuff. Here are also some suggestions. So when someone gives you ideas, perhaps, and it's not a particularly favorable idea at that time, instead of outright rejecting the idea, it can be also good to consolidate ideas. So get ideas from here, get ideas from there, combine them together. You can provide suggestions. You can build on the ideas they gave. So these are also some ways of circumventing the criticism. And now let's proceed to the nuances of effective communication. First, what's interesting is there are actually only a few things that we can manipulate and we get great results. And it's fascinating. This is similar, this is in line with what I've said previously, sa framing. So for example, 62% say no when asked if the United States should allow speeches against democracy. But only 46% say yes when asked if such speeches should be forbidden. So you see, using the word forbid makes the implied threat more apparent. And so people are most likely to prefer the word allow, even if allow and not forbid really just mean the same thing. And another situation would be the recent Olympics. So this is particularly evident now because I saw this post on Facebook. So they say the bronze medalist is often happier than the silver medalist because yung silver medalist galing sa talo. So usually the championship round, talo yung silver medalist. So the bronze medalist is often happier because the bronze medalist came from a win. But has it ever bothered you why there exists such a big distinction between third and fourth and fifth place? Because at the end of the day, fourth place is still fourth best in the whole world with 7 billion people. And when our national Olympians were unable to secure the gold in the finals of Tokyo Olympics, maybe a lot of us in our heads went, ay sayang. Ay sayang. And that's okay because that's a human response. I think that's the most natural response we could probably give out is this sayang. Kasi sayang eh. Sayang naman talaga. But the next time that maybe your class wins second place in your Ibong Adarna play, or you're hosting an event and you had quite some setbacks, but in the end, everything went great. Success nevertheless. The initial response from everything would probably be, ay sayang. But before you blurt out, sayang sa ganito, sayang sa ganito, maybe try thinking about, congrats guys, even just for that moment. Then you can perhaps reserve your could haves or suggestions for a post-event post-event evaluation. But then again, it depends on what your focus is, on what your purpose is. I'm not saying it's wrong to say sayang all the time, because there are times that saying that is really necessary when you have to call more attention to the situation. But it's a delicate period for everyone, and how you react in that very moment, the words you say, that split-second decision making could immediately and significantly change the atmosphere of the whole team. And lastly, for word choice, it's the end versus but. So I think this pretty much speaks for itself. But just try to listen and try to look at the words. You did great on the project, but versus you did great on the project and. So which do you think sounds better? The but or the and? Another example. I understand why you're frustrated, but I didn't mean for it to come across that way. I understand why you're frustrated, and I didn't mean for it to come across that way. Yeah. So it's a really subtle difference, both 2-3 letter words, but the effect is so profound because the word but essentially dismisses the first phrase altogether. This usually isn't an issue, but when it undoes a praise, an agreement, or an important point, then it becomes a problem. Then it becomes a better option to use the word and instead of but. Now, this might be very trivial to you at the moment, but the next time you're writing a letter, the next time you're sending a message to your friend or to your teacher, and you see the word but, maybe try to think, try to have a double look at it. Should I use but or should I use and? And when it comes to the word order, it's also the same thing. It's amazing how we can just manipulate a few things. It's the same phrase, but just in a different order. I would love to help, but my parents are in town. My parents are in town, but I would love to help. It can easily turn a yes into a no and a no into a yes. Here, what this illustrates is that the important thing to stress should be in the beginning of the sentence. So in this case, the important thing to stress is that Mr. Richard's Sixth Amendment rights were violated. So why not put that in the first part of the sentence? And that way it's more evident, it's more stressed, it's given the spotlight in the whole sentence. And lastly, this also perfectly illustrates the power, the impact of word order. Evidence indicated that the patient had not received any instructions. Number 2, evidence indicated that the patient failed to instruct. The physician failed to instruct. So between sentences 1 and 2, you can easily see how the shift from the patient to the physician is shifted. So imagine the implications of word order, word choice. Just imagine what this can do, how you can shift the focus in your writing. Number 3, evidence indicated that the physician also failed to instruct. So the difference between sentence 2 and sentence 3 is just the addition of the word also. But it's so profound. Kasi adding the word also adds further insult to the injury. Also, it's like apart from other errors made by the physician also failed to instruct. So it's another blow to the physician's credibility. Virginia Tuft put it best: all syntax can do and it is a very great deal, is to make the right word shine to its best advantage, as brightly as possible and in just the right place, set off from others or clustered with them. And the last one would be body language. For example, in my case, when I'm talking about a boring topic but I want to engage my audience, I act excited and my eyes get bigger. The dynamics of my voice changes when I want to emphasize something. And I find myself engaging in more non-verbal cues, as seen in the increase of movement in my hands, or sometimes my shoulders, or even my head. It can be about eye contact. On eye contact, the right duration can be a sign of trustworthiness. Fear can be signaled with an open mouth and a wide stare. Shifting your eyes, pursing your lips can convey lack of trustworthiness. Mirroring an interviewer, when you mirror what your interviewer does, it's actually a good way to show that you're listening, that you're responding. So mirroring is really important, not just in conversation, but also in body language. And the distance between speakers says a lot about their level of intimacy. And before I end, I'd like to just share a few things that I wish I knew earlier. Just quickly. So number one would be to learn from everything and everyone. Personally, I don't like reading books. I don't like reading books. Ang binabasa ko lang na books ay mga textbooks, mga biology textbooks. Yan lang yung mga binabasa ko. But I don't like reading non-textbooks kasi tamad ako. But I learned a lot from TV shows and songs. So that's where I get my new vocabulary. And when I say learn from everything and everyone, you learn from everyone, from your shobe, your shoti. It's good to practice adjusting to different levels of knowledge. That way, you're more receptive, you're more flexible when talking to different people. Number two would be to customize your education. If you feel like this talk isn't the best investment of your time at this moment, then go invest your precious time elsewhere. If you feel like you're a visual learner and you can go to YouTube or search for graphs and images. No? So a lot more time for the approach that suits you best. If you feel like talks like these don't really help improve your communication skills, then a lot more time for opportunities that work for you, such as speaking engagements or writing courses. Customize your education. Next would be to choose the best sources. Sobrang dami resources and templates, especially sa internet. When you're writing a letter and you don't know how to start it, how to end it, just type letter of request, letter of application, and you'll see so many templates. But the difficult part is choosing the best template. Choosing the template that works best for you, for your situation, the most appropriate template. Next would be, it's hard to fix mistakes you don't see. Kung hindi mo alam na may mali, paano mo siya babaguhin? So it's always a good practice to have someone look at your work before sending it, to have them check to improve on your mistakes. The next would be the power of I'll get back to you. You don't have to promise anything without hearing everything. I think we're all a bit more guilty of this than we think. Sometimes we get too excited about things and this can cloud our rationality. We think on impulse instead. But it's important na when in doubt, you can always say, wait, I'll get back to you. It's really powerful. You can say, oh, sorry, I'm not the sole decision maker of my team. I'll consult my team or I'll consult my advisor and I'll get back to you. I'll check my schedule. I'll check this or that with him or her. Then I'll get back to you. And the last one, and I'd like to end with this, it's to fake it till you make it. But before I proceed with the explanation, it's important that there's a fine line between faking it till you make it and lying, of course. So you can't lie about your level of knowledge or your competencies. You can't you con artist level. No. What I want to say is there's an art to communication. And the beauty of fake it till you make it comes into play when sometimes you have to act like you really know what to say, what you're saying. And you're really excited about what you're saying, even when you're not. And sometimes you just have to act your way through it until you eventually forget that you were acting in the first place. Just act. Try to act, not pretend. Try to act, being so good at something, and eventually you'll forget you were acting in the first place. I think the key takeaway from this whole thing is that so little as one word could change a person's mind. How do I choose the right words then? Because unfortunately, there's no binary black and white rule that you can consult when choosing for a word. But there's a universal guiding question. Between the word options that I have, which among these is most inclined to the purpose I want to achieve? And I think the bigger lesson here is you don't have to change a lot to be a good leader. You don't need fancy words to be a good communicator. You don't need a high position to be a great leader. Sometimes what matters more are the little things we can do, the little things we can change, the little tools we can use, the little efforts we exert that may or may not be noticed by others. Work ethic, determination, attention to detail, creativity, critical thinking, empathy, compassion. These are the things that you don't see at face value, but ultimately are the most important in making a great leader. So I hope you can apply what you've learned and you can apply these techniques in fighting the good fight. So that's it. That ends my presentation. Thank you, everyone. I hope you learned a lot. And I hope you can apply these things. So I think this is it.